Next up on the number one tee.
I feel like this could be about a 30-second episode, and it would go something like this. Get longer because it will really help your scores. End of discussion. But we're going to get into some of the data around this, and we're going to go through a couple of things, give you a few different things to think about, and maybe go over a couple of ways that you can think about adding distance. First, we're going to start off with why it is important. And regardless of the skill level that you look at, regardless of the gender that you look at, as people get longer, their scores go down. Lower handicap golfers tend to be longer golfers. Higher handicap golfers tend to be shorter golfers. There's a very direct and very strong relationship between distance and what you are going to shoot. Holds true for everybody. So it's extremely important to add distance to your game. One of the many side jobs that I have in golf is I consult for Arcos, and Arcos is a stat tracking app. We have about 750 million shots. And before I go into the distance, I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch on Arcos, but for all the players that I work with, I coach at Princeton. I work with the men's team there. I work with several other elite amateurs, and I work with some PGA Tour pros. And for everybody that I work with, I want you to track your stats. I don't care if I was working with any of you. I wouldn't care if you did that on the back of a napkin. It'd be great if you used Arcos, but you need to track your stats. You need to understand where you are and where you fit, because we're all different. We all have different fingerprints with our golf game, and it's important to understand the weaknesses that you have. And distance plays into that. There's a few components of your driver and hitting it off the tee, including accuracy and how far you're hitting it. I did a deep dive on the Arccos database with the 750 million shots that we had, and I looked for players that gained more than 10 yards year over year. So I found players that played, I think it was 30 rounds of golf was the minimum last year and 30 rounds this year, let's say. And I wanted to find players that gained 10 or more yards. It's a huge population. There's a lot of people that are speed training, a lot of people that are adding distance. And of all of these players that gained 10 or more yards, 81% of them improved. Their handicaps got lower, their scores got better. 65% of them improved by one or more shots, and 44% of them improved by two or more shots. This is one of the great reasons why, if you are on the average end or the lower average end of distance and how far you hit it, why you would want to think about adding more. And one of the reasons distance is so important to think about in your game. Every day when you show up to the golf course, there's going to be some variance in your game. Some days you putt great. Some days you putt very poorly. Same thing goes for your chipping, your pitching, your approach play, the accuracy with your driver. But the one thing that pretty much shows up all the time is distance. And when you add that distance into your game, it's going to be there day in and day out. This is why you see both on the PGA Tour and the LPGA Tour, the longer players tend to gravitate towards the top of the money list. There is a lot of benefit to bringing that distance to the table every single day. And we're going to get to one of our second points, and that's going to be around fairways and how fairways are not exactly the most important thing we want to think about. So we're going to come to that in just a second. So back to this study that I did on people that gained distance. I also looked at the individuals that lost distance. I found players that lost more than 10 yards year over year. 65% of these players got worse. Their handicaps got lower. Their handicaps got higher. Their scores got higher. 45%, they were impacted by more than a shot, and 27% more than two shots. So there's this very strong relationship between the direction your scores are going to go and how far you're hitting the ball.
I think as golfers, you always think that you're not far enough. You know what I mean? And there could be a lot of us in here that do have plenty of distance as it is, especially if, I would probably say the majority of us are playing between 5,000 and 5,400 yards. Okay. That's probably kind of where we're playing from those tee boxes. I mean, obviously getting as close as possible is nice, but at some point do you say to yourself, I have like the amount of distance I have is enough. It is above average. It is right at average. Or is it always trying to push towards more?
Well, I would say that's a great question. And I would say if you've never done anything to intentionally add distance, you should. This is why you see players on the PGA Tour and the LPGA Tour working extremely hard to add distance. This is why collegiate players, male and female, are working extremely hard to add distance. Now, if you've been on this path and you've been adding distance and you are close to maxed out, then obviously we're not going to focus on distance and adding more. We want to maintain what you have. If you've never done speed training, and we're going to talk about some of those options, I would encourage you to look into that. If you've never done a fitness program that is geared around adding distance, becoming more mobile, becoming stronger, improving that rotational strength. If you've never done anything like that, I would encourage you to look into that. Now, if you've been doing those things and you are well above average for your skill level, or well above average overall, then I would not look to add too much more, but I would make sure that I was doing things to maintain it. One thing that's really important to note is that distance is a skill. You look at some players that have added a significant amount of distance, and that was through dedication to trying to add distance through speed training and working on their fitness. And the combination of the two has allowed some players to add significant distance. I think, the best example of this would be on the male side several years ago with Bryson DeChambeau and how much distance he added. He was already one of the longer players in the game, averaging about 300 yards, and he added 22 or 23 yards to his tee shots on the PGA Tour, which is just an unbelievable gain to add that many yards at that level. And he got better because of it. His scores went down significantly. He won a lot more money. There's a very direct relationship to distance and what your scores are going to look like.
One more question going into, because I think we're going to go into fairways soon, because I'm playing with a lot of college players this week, and they definitely are, as far as comparing them to my game, they are what I see much more aggressive and much more confident with just swing. I mean, we're playing in a desert course, really tight fairways. Do you think it is better to kind of try and overpower a hole and really try and get, let's just say under 120 yards out? Does that make it worth it? Or is there a part of course management that really comes into play where, take your medicine and just go, be safe and be 180 yards out? I mean,
the general rule is you want to be as close as you can, as often as you can, making sure to take into account things like penalty strokes and other hazards, where other hazards might be, you hit it into the trees. You're on a desert course, so there's no woods there, but you hit it into the trees and it's a situation where you're going to need to come out sideways. Or maybe on this desert course, there's a lot of, bushes where the ball, you could just lose the ball and have to reload and hitting 3 from the tee. So you need to weigh those things, because penalty strokes, having to come out sideways, those are not conducive to good scores. But we typically want to get the ball down there as far as we can, as often as we can. And that includes things like second shots as well. If you find yourself in a situation where you can't reach a par 5, or it's a par 4 where, maybe something didn't go right off the tee, and you can't really reach, you should still try to advance the ball as far as you safely can and not lay back 2 numbers. Now, I know that sometimes people get uncomfortable in some of those in between wedge yardages. I've looked at that in depth, and there will be a lot of people that will say, well, I'm better from 90 yards than I am from 55 yards. And I want to lay back to that 90-yard number. And that is not the case for about 95, 96% of golfers. The ones that are really poor from that 50, 55-yard range, when you peel the layers back and you look at the rest of their what I would call short game around the green, you will see that they probably have a pretty bad case of the yips going on. When you see somebody have a lot of 30-yard shots that go 30 yards past the green, probably something going on yip-wise with them. So advance the ball as close as you can. You will get the ball closer, the closer you are to the hole typically. So get it down there as far as you can, as often as you can. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Lou, if I could just jump in and ask just one quick question. I have a lot of students that obviously always want more distance and stuff like that. And anytime that we ever give them drills to try to progress them to try to swing a little faster or get a little bit bigger backswing or anything like that, they're always extremely fearful of losing accuracy or consistency. And do you find that to be a typical fear of a lot of people that are considering speed training and say, I'm afraid of losing that consistency or accuracy that I used to have with my slower swing? And then if that's the case, if they do lose that consistency and accuracy, is it still worth the more yardage, even if they get a little bit more wild accuracy wise?
It is absolutely worth adding distance. And so it's good timing. My newsletter, I'll either send it out tomorrow or Friday. And this week's topic is very similar to what I talked about, the study that I did looking at people that gained 10 or more yards year over year. This one is a similar flavor, but I found golfers that added 5% or more to their tee shot. So let's say you were averaging, just to make the math easy, 200 yards off the tee, and you added 5%, you would now be averaging 210 off the tee. So I looked for players that added 5% to their drives year over year. And of those players, 94% of them improved their strokes gained off the tee. And of the 94% that improved their strokes gained off the tee, 75% of them improved strokes gained off the tee by 0.7 of a shot or more. So do they get a little bit wilder? Not really, because if you think of when you start at the tee box and you hit the ball, it's a triangle. So I know this is going to be a podcast and people can't see this. So it's a triangle. And the longer you hit the ball, let's say you're right on this edge of the triangle right here, the longer you hit the ball, the farther you end up away from the middle of the fairway, but it's still the same offline angle, if that makes sense. And so sometimes what happens when people hit the ball a little bit longer, they're just hitting it a little bit farther down the edge of the triangle, which is farther from the middle. And they think, well, I got a little bit wilder, I hit less fairways. Yes, but the newsletter article that I have coming out tomorrow looks at the change in big misses. So how many of your drives were more than 25 yards from the center of the fairway, 30 yards, 40 yards? How many additional penalty strokes did you have? How many additional recovery situations did you have? What was your change in fairway percentage? What was your change in your dispersion? Where I look at all of your tee shots and get a measure of how wide that area is, and then adjust that for how much longer you are. And so some people get a little bit wilder. Some people actually get straighter, which is really interesting. About half the population, their fairway percentage goes up. They got longer and they hit more fairways. And the half that hit less fairways, they don't hit significantly less fairways. I did a pretty in-depth analysis on PGA Tour players for one of the tour players that I work with. And I looked at the 200 PGA Tour players that gained the most distance year over year. And this is going back to since we have data in 1983. And these are the players that gained the most distance year over year. I removed players like in the early 2000s when the Pro V1 came out and everybody got 20 yards longer overnight. I removed that. I removed some people that I knew were big injuries that were known players. And of the players that were left over, as a group, they only hit 0.5% less fairways as a group, even though they gained a significant amount of distance. So the fear that people have about hitting less fairways is not founded. It's not founded at the professional level. It's not founded at the amateur level. Will there be some players that hit a few less? And when I say a few, I mean fractional, a fraction less. There will be some, but overall, you're going to significantly improve your strokes gained off the tee, which is what what you should be most focused on.
Sorry, I have to laugh because when I play with Justin every once in a while and he's swinging really hard, he's like, I don't know, when I swing harder, it goes straighter. And so when he was nodding his head at you, like, yeah, sometimes like people when they gain distance, they hit it straighter. Justin's like, yeah.
It's very true for a lot of people. One of the other interesting things too is there will be a lot of coaches that will, and I'm not a swing coach, so please don't take any of this as swing coach advice. It's just what a number of them have told me, that when you start to speed train and you work at getting more efficient, moving the club more efficiently, swinging it faster, you're going to kind of self-organize into a way that for a lot of players could help to improve your mechanics a little bit, could help to improve how you're delivering the club. That's, better question for a swing coach and not for me. But when I look at the data as the numbers guy, I don't see the thing that so many people are afraid of. It just doesn't happen.
That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. You can swing so much faster swinging on plane, right? So when people, and I've done a speed training class at one of my country clubs before, and it was over 4 weeks, and we had everyone gain anywhere between 5 to 15 miles an hour of clubhead speed. But everybody started to swing so much more on plane because you can swing faster on plane, right? So as we're going faster and faster and faster, it makes all the sense in the world that people start to find the plane so much more, and it gets you away from that, I think, sometimes temptation to guide the club and try to guide the ball straight, which then makes you swing a little bit more off plane, or maybe hold the face more open, or maybe dramatically close it because you're so worried about the direction of the ball that you actually make sure you hit the ball more sideways. So I totally agree with that more speed training would actually make you just organically swing more efficiently.
Let's talk about why, even if you do get a little wilder with your tee shots, if you gain distance, why you shouldn't care, why it doesn't really matter. So again, looking in the Arccos database, which we have, you can imagine how many golfers we have if we have 750 million shots. It's a pretty incredible amount of golfers with a lot of rounds of golf that have been played. And what I did for every skill level is I looked at a player's best 20% of their rounds. So if you played 100 rounds, I looked at your best 20 rounds and your worst 20 rounds. And in your best 20 rounds, I looked at how many fairways you hit. And then in your worst 20 rounds, I looked at how many fairways you hit. And for every skill level, whether you're a scratch player or whether you're a 20 index, doesn't matter, everyone in between, the difference in fairways hit between your great rounds and your really bad rounds is only about 3/4 of a fairway per round. So you're only hitting about 3/4 of a fairway less per round. So in those 20 rounds, if you're a 10 handicap, you might average 7.2 fairways in your really good rounds. And in your really bad rounds, you would average 6.4. So there's not this huge gap of like, I went out and I played a great round and I hit 14 fairways today, and I went out and I played a horrible round and I only hit 2 fairways. That's simply not what's happening. The number of fairways you are hitting is not a huge driver of what your score is going to be. What is a huge driver of what your score is going to be is penalty shots, recovery shots. So when we look at those really bad rounds, there's a huge uptick in penalty shots and recovery shots. So you've either hit it OB, you've hit it into the water, you've hit it into the trees and need to come out sideways. There's a massive uptick in those shots to the tune, it depends on the skill level, anywhere from 2 to 2.5 additional penalty strokes or recovery shots, with some of those penalty shots being stroke and distance, which is a a double killer. So that is a huge driver of the increased scores in your bad rounds. And so I typically, if somebody is not using in one of the strokes gained apps to get their strokes gained numbers for each part of the game, and they're doing, a lot of golfers will do fairway hit, green hit, number of putts. A lot of people do that. I would tell you to stop doing fairways hit. Just take that off the list. I'd also tell you to stop tracking how many putts you had. Remove those. Greens is good. Greens in regulation are great. There's a really strong relationship between how many greens you hit and what your handicap's going to be. But for fairways, stop tracking that and start tracking instead the number of tee shots that you hit where you had a reasonable chance to get it on or around the green in regulation. That's a successful tee shot. That means not in the water, not in the woods, not OB. We're going to come back to sand traps in just a second. That means you have a relatively reasonable chance to hit a green in regulation. That's a success. Now, I get that golf is not played on the exact same course every time you show up, and we're all playing different golf courses. And some of us may play at a club that has 6-inch rough for whatever reason, and they water it like crazy, and it's just impossible to hit shots out of there. Clearly, some of the stuff we're talking about will be impacted by course conditions. So if you happen to be at a club with 6-inch rough, if it were me, I'd probably be finding a new club or be driving the lawnmower out there myself on a Saturday morning. But if you're at a club with typical normal rough, I would not be worrying about the rough at all in any way, shape, or form. So I want to give you a couple of numbers, and this is going to be for 100 yards, and this is going to be for a 15 handicap female golfer. So and this may be part of quiz. I'm going to quiz Tori on this one. So I'm going to put Tori on the spot. So from the sand, from 100 yards, a 15 handicap female golfer will average about 4.15 shots. From the rough, again at 100 yards, they'll average about 3.85 shots. What do you think they'll average from the fairway? 15 handicap, 100 yards in the fairway. So again, sand is 4.15. Rough is 3.85. What will fairway be? I'm putting her on the spot.
I'm going to say 3.5.
It's 3.81.
Oh,
there's not that. If you're playing a golf course with relatively typical rough, there's not that much difference. And I'm going to say something here, and your eyes are going to pop out of your head when I say this. Amateurs are better from the rough than PGA or LPGA players. Yeah. And that sounds crazy, and I don't really mean it the way that I'm saying it. But that definitely gets people's attention when I say it that way. It's not that amateurs are better from the rough. It's just that amateurs are nowhere near as good from the fairway as tour players are. When a tour player gets a lie in the fairway and they can get the club on the back of the ball, they can control spin, they can control trajectory. They are very, very good with their low point control, and they can get that club on the ball how they want. Like if you see a tour player, when we get on hard pan as amateurs, there's a lot of us that kind of tense up and go, oh, this is not good. Tour players they don't care at all. They're licking their chops because they can get that club perfectly on the back of the ball, and they're not even worried about it. It's not even a second thought for them. And so the reason that amateurs are better from the rough, it's just we're nowhere near as good from the fairway, if that makes sense. So the gap for amateur golfers, and it depends on the handicap and the distance from the hole, but it's anywhere from like 0.05 to 0.15 strokes. And that would be the difference between the number of shots it takes to hole out from the fairway or the rough from the same distance. So it's about 0.05 to 0.15 shots, give or take roughly. For tour players, that's about 0.3 of a shot, the difference between being in the fairway and being in the rough. And again, that's because they're so good from the fairway. You get them in the rough where they're not exactly sure how the ball is going to fly, how much grass is really in between, how it's going to spin, how much club they can get on the ball. Like that impacts them a lot more compared to what they're able to do from the fairway. Hopefully the way I explained that made sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So this is why hitting fairways for most people on most golf courses isn't all that important. We just need to keep it in play. But the one thing that I really want to point out here is sand. All of us amateurs, me included, we're not all that, we are typically not that great from the sand. I'm going to recap the number here. It's 4.15 shots from the sand for 100 yards for a 15 handicap. It's 3.85 from the rough. It's 0.3 of a shot difference between the sand and the rough. So when you come up to a hole, and there's a lot of holes where there'll be a bunker on one side, a fairway, and then rough on the other side. Do not be afraid to shift well away from that bunker. Now, obviously, if you're shifting well away from the bunker and there's trees in play or there's water in play or there's OB in play or there's something bad that you're shifting towards, we don't want to do that. But if it's just bunker, fairway, rough for as far as the eye can see, like shift way away from that bunker. Hitting the fairway in that situation, again, if you're playing typical rough, if you're in 6-inch rough, then that's a different discussion. But if you're playing typical rough, shift way away from those bunkers. We want to try to avoid as many of those as we possibly can because those add to our score. Any questions on that?
No, I think we're good. Let's get into the speed training.
All right, so speed training. I know we want to get to some Q&A here. This will be really quick. So I've done 3 different programs with speed training. I've done Stack System, I've done Super Speed, and I've done another system by a coach named Clay Ballard. He has a program called the 20-minute distance fix. So the Stack System and Super Speed are weighted clubs that you swing. The Stack System has interchangeable weights and an app that you get on your phone, and it puts you through a protocol. Super Speed is different clubs or 3 different weighted clubs that you use, and you go through protocols with them, working on your speed training. And then Clay Ballard's system is you're hitting golf balls with your own driver, and he has a number of different drills that you do. I like all 3, and you'll have to figure out what works for you. If you're not exactly sure which one might be best, they're all great. Like all of them are going to help you gain distance. And I would say, look at the 3 of them and see which one is appealing to you and go with that one. What I would tell you need for all of them is you need a way to measure your speed. So these programs, you'll be either swinging your own driver or you will be swinging a weighted club that has a different weight to it. And you need to measure how fast the club is going so that you can track and improve and try to work on what those speeds are. Having that feedback is extremely important. So there's a radar device that I think even a lot of these sites, they sell right on there. It's called PRGR. It's a small little tiny unit, and it's a little radar device, and you put it behind your club or behind this weighted club, and you swing, and it tells you how fast your club was going. Going through and doing speed training you have to have one of these devices to measure how fast the club is going or this weighted stick is going. It's essential. It's absolutely part of it. Then the other things I'll mention here is the fitness side of it. So there's 2 people that I've gotten to know pretty well. And one of them, his name's Mike Carroll, and he is on Twitter, and his handle on Twitter is Fit for Golf. He works with a lot of different tour pros. And he works mostly with PGA Tour pros, and he has an app, and his app it's fitness, but there's a pretty big component to gaining distance and gaining speed. And then there's another gentleman out of the UK. His name is Jamie Greaves. He works with a lot of female professional players over there in the UK. And he also has an app which has a big focus on, strength and gaining speed and getting that rotational velocity that you need to gain distance. So I would encourage you to look at one of those speed training systems. I would encourage you to look at one of these 2 options or anything else, and work on that to try to add speed to your game. And you can gain speed really quickly. If you've never speed trained before and you purchase, let's say, the Stack System and you get a workout program from Jamie Greaves, you are going to be absolutely shocked at how much speed you're going to be able to add in the first 3, 4, 5 weeks if you do this program. I think the stack system, which was founded by a guy named Dr. Sasho McKenzie, who's one of the smartest minds in golf, and a guy named Marty Jurtson, who's the VP of fitting at Ping. They, on their app, they track what everybody does. And so you go through these protocols and you do it on your phone, and they track results for everyone. And the typical person is gaining about 6% club head speed. And I think it might be the first protocol that you go through, which I don't hold me to this, it's like maybe 6 weeks, something like that. So adding 6% to whatever your swing speed is, that might not sound like much, but that's a lot. That is absolutely a lot. And that's going to be that, depending on where you are right now, it's going to be that, 7 to 13 yards, 14 yards, depending on where you are. And as we talked about at the beginning, if you gain more than 10 yards, you are very, you have a 50-50 chance to lower your handicap by more than 2 shots if you gain 10 yards off the tee. So I would encourage you to look at all of these things and try to add some speed to your game.
Tell me if this is right here, Lou. I think I heard a stat for every mile an hour you climb in clubhead speed, you can gain 3 yards with your driver. Which would mean you really only need like 3 or 4 miles an hour faster clubhead speed to get that 10 extra yards.
Yeah, it's about that. It's between 2 and 3. That's going to depend on your launch angle, your current speed that you're at. But yeah, it's going to be around there somewhere. And if we split the difference and call it 2.5, if you gain 4 miles per hour of clubhead speed, that's going to be your 10 yards. And that is, your scores are going to drop if you do that.
And I have a student right now that's actually using the stack system. I don't get to see him in person because he's a winter student of mine, but he started at the end of April with the stack system, and he's gained 8 miles an hour just since the end of April. But he's diligent with it. He's doing it, every day or every other day, and it is absolutely a fantastic way to add speed.
Yeah, it is. I actually went through this, and you can Google. I think it was Golf Digest or Golf Magazine. I forget what it was, but they did an article on my speed gains like 2 or 3 years ago. I was swinging about 99, and I got that up to cruising at about 113, 114. So I added 14, 15 miles an hour of speed. And it didn't take that long. I mean, I did this over the course of probably 6 months, maybe 5 or 6 months. And I went from, kind of an above average amateur to swinging at tour speeds. Now I still stink, but I was swinging a lot faster, and my scores went down significantly very quickly when I added all of that distance. I didn't feel comfortable telling people to add distance and not going out and doing it on my own. So I did, and I saw a lot of benefit from it.
Yeah, 113 is very impressive. I believe that's, and TrackMan has read that as the tour average, PGA Tour average is around 113.
It's about tour average, but that doesn't mean I'm hitting my driver like a tour player.
Another benefit that I have found with these speed training things that Lou is suggesting here is that you do all the speed training typically without a golf ball. So you're actually making a lot of swings away from a golf ball. And I find a lot of people are afraid to swing faster because the moment that they see a ball go sideways or anything like that, they retreat back to that slower swing speed that they can keep the ball straight. So it's almost like you're going to the gym when you're doing these swing speed sticks or the stack system, where you're actually able to kind of gain the speed without the fear of the ball going sideways. And then the next time you introduce a golf ball to your swing, you're just naturally swinging a lot faster because you've just kind of gotten used to that speed that you're at.
I did a lot of speed training, and I still do a lot of speed training with my own driver and a golf ball. So one of the programs that I mentioned was through Clay Ballard, and his program is with actually using your own driver and hitting a golf ball. And there's a lot of long drivers that do it that way. And the one thing that, if you're going to do that, you have to not care at all about the quality of contact. You cannot care at all about where the ball goes. The only thing that I care about when I'm speed training like that is how fast the club head is moving. And I literally one time swung and missed. Like when I'm swinging, I am going crazy. Like I am just trying to move the club as fast as I can. And I swung and I missed. And it was almost like, when you're going down the steps and you think another step is there and there's not a step there, and your body kind of just freaks out for a second because there wasn't a step there and you thought there was going to. That's what happened with my driver swing. So you have to, if you're going to hit your own, hit a ball with your own club, you just simply cannot care about contact and just try to move the club as fast as you possibly can.
Hey, Lou, we have a question in the chat here, and I'm just curious what you think of it here and what your answer would be. Is there a simple way to help me conceptualize the difference between speed and tempo? I feel like when I speed up my swing, my tempo is off.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like if you talk to the people that are really into studying gaining speed, what we're trying to do is we're trying to raise the upper limit of what's possible for us so we can swing slower than that. Like in an ideal world, like all the long drive players, they typically, when they do a long drive competition, they're swinging at 100%. They're going all out as fast as they can. And when they are playing normal golf, regular golf, they're swinging at about 90% of what their top end max is. So if you have a player that swings the club at 150 miles per hour during a long drive competition, they're only going to swing it at 90% when they're playing normal golf, which is about 135. And that 135 mile per hour swing, which is off the charts fast, when you watch them do that, it's going to look very, very slow. It's going to look shockingly slow. There's a gentleman out there. His name is Eddie Fernandez, and you can Google him and look at some of his stuff on Twitter. He's 52 years old. He's the longest senior player on the planet, and he's one of the top 8 or 9 longest guys on the planet for every single age. And he swings the club extremely fast, and he has a lot of videos out there where he's swinging at his normal speed, and it looks like he's taking half wedge shots. It's just incredible. And that's because you want to be using a lower percentage of effort. And I know some of the data on this one. So Matt Fitzpatrick, you probably know who he is. He's gained a lot of speed over the last few years, and he actually used the stack system. He worked with Sasho and Marty, and they got him on the stack system and got him training. And when he first started, he was swinging at like 113-ish, 114, right around there with them. And when he tried to swing as fast as he possibly could, he could only swing at like 115. So he basically was gaming pretty much max effort. And the biggest benefit of speed training is you're going to increase your max effort. So what happened after just a few weeks, Matt went from only being able to swing at a maximum of 115 to being able to swing at a maximum of 120. And his club head speed went from like 113 to 114, but now his max is 120. He's swinging at 114. That's way more in control than swinging at 113 with a maximum of 115. He was at like nearly maximum effort there. And so this tempo problem that you're talking about, if you raise your ceiling, and even if you stay at the speed that you are right now, I mean, we don't want that, but if you stay at the speed you are right now, or even just a little bit faster, it's going to feel a lot slower because you have such a higher ceiling. Hopefully that makes sense the way I explained that.
Yeah. And also, Justin, remember our last podcast episode, Justin, where you said, we were talking about when you feel like you swing too fast and you miss, or you blade it, or, it's just a miss hit. And you say to yourself, gosh, I swung too fast. Justin, can you explain what you said in the last podcast? Because that actually helped me a lot this week playing. I actually use that as a swing thought a lot.
So, yeah, I think a lot of people make the mistake of trying to make their swing fast everywhere, right? But the golf ball only cares about the speed being at the golf ball. But I see tons of people that have like extremely fast backswings or incredibly fast from the top of their swing. But really, at the end of the day, the ball only cares about how fast the golf ball, the club is going at the moment of impact. So when you save all of your energy to just create all the speed to be right at impact, everything else just seems to be quite smoother. And then you get to just dial in all that energy right at the ball. But it gives the outside perspective of somebody saying, oh, wow, that guy must be, or gal must be swinging so slow and so soft. And that's why he or she hits the ball far. But it's not. It's because they're saving all of their fastest energy for that one moment that they're hitting the golf ball, and everything else is smooth because they're saving it up for that moment. But I also loved Lou's explanation as well, that with speed training, you're trying to get that to be 100% all the time and pushing that to be faster and faster and faster. So then all of a sudden, let's say you start, for example, my student who's working with the stack right now, he's swinging at 90 miles an hour at the start of this whole thing. And he's swinging, and at pretty much his fastest swing right now is 90 miles an hour. But as he's been able to work with the stack system and get himself up to 98 miles an hour, now all of a sudden when he goes out to play and he swings at 95 miles an hour, he's going to be hitting the ball 10, maybe even 15 yards further than he used to, but he'll look like he's swinging slower because he's now reached a new 100%. And I've never really thought of it that way until Lou explained it. So I really loved that explanation as well.
Yeah. Think of it like lifting if the maximum box you could lift up was 100 pounds and that was it, you couldn't lift any more than 100 pounds. And we gave you a bunch of 95-pound boxes, like that's going to be a lot of hard work. But if you worked out for a while and went away and you got really, really strong, and now the maximum box you could lift was 500 pounds, just going to exaggerate here, that 95-pound box is not heavy anymore. And so that's kind of what speed training is. We want to raise that ceiling up. So we're going to inch our swing speed up that we play on the golf course, 2, 3, 4 miles per hour, maybe 5. But it will not, it's going to feel slow to you because your maximum ceiling is way above that. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish here.
That's great.
The other thing I want to say too is I'm a huge fan of speed training, moving that club faster, but you cannot forget about strike. So if you are hitting the ball like really low on the heel, crazy high, and if you're hitting nowhere near the center of the club face, there's maybe some low-hanging fruit for you there. Center face contact is going to gain you yards. And so, you have someone here like Justin that could speak way more intelligently about that than me. If you are having an issue with hitting it near the center of the face, work on that because there might be some low-hanging fruit for you to add a few yards there as well.
Yeah, it's probably the easiest way to get more distance because you don't have to swing any harder to hit the ball more in the center. And then also it brings you more of that consistency. And then also that drug that golf is, golf is a drug because that center hit just feels so darn good. And we just keep wanting to get more of a taste of it because it's such a good feeling hitting the center of the face. And if any of you are out there that wanted to know how can you work on hitting the ball more in the center of the face, just using foot powder spray, from like a Walgreens or a grocery store, just go get some foot powder spray and just spray it on the face of your club. And then when you hit, you can see where it is. And then I think there is a golf company out there they call Strike Spray or something like that actually makes an actual, which might be a little bit more efficient. But either way, but having an awareness of where you're hitting it, because a lot of times I'll have a student that continually hits the ball off the toe and they have no idea they're hitting it off of it. And it's easy to self-assess where you're hitting the ball on the face just by looking at that powder spray on your club. I'm
not a fan of the spray, not because I don't think it's worthwhile. You absolutely do it. But like when I'm, it's like becomes like this cloud of foot spray and I'm a very delicate flower and it just makes me sneeze like the whole time I'm out there. So what I typically do is I use a dry erase marker. It's a little bit more of a pain, but I'll pick up a golf ball. I don't have one here. I'll take a dry erase marker and I'll draw like a nickel sized dot on there. And I'll put that down with the dot facing where the club's going to hit it. And then I hit it and it leaves a little mark on your club. And then you can just kind of wipe it off. I tend to do that so I don't sneeze the whole time.
That's a good
That's
tip.
Another great way.
This has motivated me to maybe get a stack system or get a super speed system. I actually have never tried it. And I feel like maybe I can try it and kind of vlog my journey through it.
That's awesome. That'd be great.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Hey Lou, I have a selfish question of my own, just because it's just a little bit regarding my own game. But I have I'm particularly a longer player. I can swing up to close to 120 miles an hour, especially up here in Flagstaff where I am in the summertime. I get drives up to 350, sometimes even 370. You know, with a good hit. When I was in college, though, I had 3 other roommates. Me and one other roommate were the 2 longest hitters of the 4 roommates. And then we had 2 shorter hitters who were the other 2 roommates. But when it came down to scoring average, the 2 shorter hitters were the better scoring average and were the better players on the team. And part of the reason why was just because when our shorter hitter roommates hit a little push fade to the right, it would land in the rough before it eventually reached out of bounds or getting out of play. And if there is somebody who's playing that maybe listening here that is maybe a longer player, but tends to put the ball out of play a lot, either out of bounds or in the woods where they have to punch out or anything like that, is there a suggestion there on, is speed still the advantage there, or is it worth backing off speed or backing down a club just to keep the ball more in play more often?
Well, yeah, it's really important to know your dispersion. And when I say that, I just mean how big of an area you hit the golf ball in. Even the best players in the world, they hit the golf ball into a pretty big area, the pretty big bucket that they hit the ball into. And on the PGA Tour, like if there was out of bounds on both sides, imagine, a golf course in Florida where it's houses lying down both sides of the fairway, and there's 65 or 64 yards of room between OB stakes on both sides. For most tour players, in let's say no wind conditions, that's not enough room. They're going to hit too many balls out of bounds. And that's a pretty decent amount of space. And so you need to know how much space you need in order to minimize how often you are hitting balls out of bounds into penalty shots. Depending on the hole, the situation, the handicap index, you don't want to hit more than 2 to 3% of your tee shots into penalty situations. And so if you're doing more than that, you either need to go work with someone on some accuracy with your driver, or you need to start hitting shorter clubs. So in the PGA Tour example that I gave you, if they only had 64 yards between out of bounds, they would need to probably drop down to a 3-wood or their driving iron, or whatever the case might be. You need to keep getting shorter so that you don't hit more than 2% of your balls out of bounds. And so knowing how much area you need with all of your clubs is extremely, extremely helpful. The other thing I would say is, a lot of us, we buy clubs kind of off the shelf, and shafts come, for some of us on the longer side. And I've had a lot of players that have shortened their driver significantly. And so, for example, like for men, a lot of golf clubs you would buy would be like 45.5 inches, roughly, about that shaft length. I've known a ton of people that were struggling with contact and direction, and they cut their shaft down 2 inches, 2.5 inches. Now, please don't go out in your garage and take a hacksaw to your club. Like, take it to a fitter, because there's things that they're going to have to do to make sure swing weights and all that are where they need to be. But it's really fascinating. And I've seen a bunch of data from this from TrackMan or GC Quad launch monitors. And what ends up happening is your overall distance doesn't really change that much. You're going to get, if you took 2.5 or 3 inches off your driver, you're going to lose a couple of yards. And that probably is, to be like, wait, this guy's just, for the last hour, he's been telling us you need to gain yards. You're going to lose just a couple of yards, but the big misses go away. The big misses get a lot smaller. Now, your longest tee shot won't be quite as long. So if you go to a short shafted driver, your best tee shot won't be as long as your best tee shot with your normal length driver or your longer driver. But your worst tee shot is typically going to be a lot better. Not only is it going to be in a tighter window, a tighter area, but it's typically going to be farther because your contact is going to be a lot better. Players were hitting it way closer to the sweet spot with the shorter shaft. So like so many other things in golf, we're all different. And it's important to, I think, experiment with some of these things. So if driver is a club you really struggle with and you can't keep it on the planet, you may want to, and instead of, leaving your driver in the garage and never playing it and only hitting a 3-wood, you may want to try a shorter shafted driver and see how that works for you and experiment and find a good fitter to help you through the process, because that could be an avenue for you to solve some of these problems that Justin just mentioned.
Yeah. And actually, I can speak from personal experience. I shortened my driver, my shaft, and just the feel made me feel so much more in control, because it didn't feel super long anymore. It felt shorter, it felt compact. It felt like I could really get after it, and that it wasn't like all the way over here, like where I could see it in my other eyeball. So, and my sister did the same thing. My sister, who is about a 10 handicap, her driver was really struggling with it. And she shortened it, and she felt the exact same way. She just felt more in control. So that's a really good resource to just test out and see if you like it, see if it works for you. So.
Same thing happened with me, that I'm long torso but short legs. So I went to a fitter and totally changed all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did it feel after?
Like I was connecting with it, and I felt like I had control of the club so much more. Mm-hmm. Where before I was like I was hitting the ground behind the ball.
It's an easy fix, but you make sure, like Lou said, you go to a fitter so that they can properly do it. And look at Kim said she started choking down and noticed a big difference. Justin, in your personal experience, is choking down, like, I remember going to a lesson and I said, I have to choke down on my 6-iron every time or I can't hit it. Is choking down always the answer, or does there have to come like a solution to that? Or can you just get used to choking down all the time?
Well, I mean, probably one of the best golfers to play the game and then randomly left the sport was a guy named Anthony Kim, and he choked down about an inch and a half on all of his clubs. And I remember he was doing a clinic with Tiger Woods one time, and Tiger asked him, he's like, why do you choke down so much? And he's like, I grew up playing with adult clubs. Like there weren't many kid clubs when he was growing up. So he was always having to choke down on the golf club. And he got just so used to the feeling of choking down that even when he went into the professional world, he might've gotten his clubs actually lengthened just so he could choke down and feel that choking down position. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we want to do whatever can bring the most confidence to your game and make you swing the most freely and most fearlessly. So, if choking down, helps with, shortening the club. And as Kim said, it's a much quicker way to do it instead of having to go to a club fitter. So that's a great way to shorten the club if you need to. And even at the tour level, there have been players that have choked down. So.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you think about Bryson DeChambeau having all of his clubs the same length?
Go ahead, Lou. You answer that one.
I think so many of these, there's no right or wrong answer. And it's really your preference and what works for you. And I think part of the journey is not being afraid to experiment with some of these things around equipment and figuring out what works. I mean, I mean, Brooke Henderson, sometimes I see her, she chokes down basically to the steel sometimes on her irons. It's crazy how much she chokes down. That's really comfortable for her, and that works really well for her. So I would encourage you to not be afraid to try out some of these different things. And one length irons, for some people, they're fantastic. Bryson also has huge grips, and there's some teachers, there's a fair number of teachers that will tell you there's a large percentage of students that are playing grips that are not the right size for them. And there are some players that will do much better with significantly larger grips. And there's some players that will do better with standard or smaller grips. The only way you're going to really answer that is if you experiment and try it out and measure and see what works for you. So no right, there's no wrong. It's just whatever's best for you.
Well, Lou, thank you for coming tonight and sharing with us and teaching us and getting us motivated. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm motivated to, start really concentrating on increasing my speed and taking it to the next level. So I appreciate you being here, giving us all the facts, giving us all the data.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alice.
Absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I will send over to Tori so she can pass it on. I have an image here that shows you a breakdown for women's distance. This is all from Arcos, and it shows you by age and by handicap what the median distance with driver is for women. I think it's really valuable to look at so you can benchmark where you are compared to others in a similar age bracket and handicap bracket. So I'll send it over to you when we're done here, Tori.
Yeah, send it over. I'll post it in our community, and it will be up tonight or whenever.
That's great.
All right. Thanks, ladies, for being here tonight. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Justin. And
thank you, Lou.
See you
Thanks, everybody.
next week.